Welcome to the BRRRAKE F1 Podcast, or maybe welcome back. I'm your host, Blake Kinsey, aka BRRRAKE, former F1 performance engineer turned F1 content creator. Now, usually this will be your home for data-driven, analytical Formula 1 content, but I've got something a little bit different for you guys today. I'll be talking to Red Bull Racing junior driver and reserve driver Liam Lawson. I first met Liam when I was working with him in the simulator at Red Bull when I was there back in 2021, and honestly, super nice, super talented guy, and it's really awesome to be able to sit down and have a conversation with him about what he's been up to recently. Now, this interview is originally focused on talking about Liam Lawson's Super Formula season this year, which is something we'll explain all about. It's an awesome Japanese open wheel series with insane performance cars. We also talk with him a little bit about his unexpected call up to drive the Alpha Tauri this season to fill in for the injured Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, I've known about Super Formula for a long time, but it's not something I particularly closely followed at all. And then when I was going through and researching it, there's actually a lot of interesting drivers that have driven this series. And we've got Alex Palou, Pato O'Ward, Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, Dan Ticktum, Nick Cassidy, and honestly, loads more. That's not even scratching the surface. So if you want to learn more about the Super Formula in general, I've done a whole video on YouTube that's already out. Go check that out on BRRRAKE F1. So join me in this conversation with Liam Lawson to talk about his path through F2 Super Formula and even Formula 1 this season. And for a bit of context, the recording was just before the Las Vegas Grand Prix, so he's got 2 races left as reserve driver at the track, and then he's getting into some off-season, so enjoy the conversation. So let's start off, Liam. It's been a minute. How you doing?
Good, not bad. Everything's starting to... We got 2 races left at this point, but obviously for me, it's a bit more... I mean, my season's kind of over. I can't drive in Abu Dhabi. You know, normally at this point of the year, I'm preparing for the young driver test, but I can't do that now. So it's kind of like my season's done.
Yeah, you've had this whole big period where you're kind of like sitting around waiting for the Super Formula season, and then you had the call up, which we'll come back to. But you've had a wild last couple of months. But today I want to talk about something that maybe a lot of the hardcore motorsport and F1 fans will know about, but not a lot of the people on the outside. They're just like, hey, what's Liam been up to? So let's talk about it. Why did you go to Japan this year?
I think from Red Bull's point of view, it's been something that they have always believed in a lot. Like they've obviously had, quite a few past drivers go to Super Formula. And the idea is it's sort of that last preparation for F1. I know a lot of people don't know about the championship and about what it is, which obviously I'm sure we'll talk about. But it's from their point of view, I think as long as you've got the super license points from Formula 2, then it's the logical thing to do, just because the car, the team, everything is so close to Formula 1.
Yeah. So the shortest answer in a nutshell, how would you describe Super Formula?
It's like a miniature Formula 1 series just in Japan. It's like, obviously Formula 1 will always be the pinnacle. So it'll always be, everything about it will be the best. You have the most people, you have the fastest cars, but Super Formula and also the things that you work on. I think one thing that you miss going Formula 2 to Formula 1 is Formula 2, because it's a one make, because everything's very, like the regulations are extremely tight. You can't really do anything, change much. It's all basic setup changes. It's setup changes that you actually almost do in like Formula 4, like entry level stuff, because that's all you're allowed to do. There's no development, there's no anything like that. So whereas in Super Formula, you have 2 manufacturers against each other. You have Honda versus Toyota. Believe it or not, there's actually development going on between not just the engine side, but also on the cars. The teams are really pushing the limits with the cars. And then you also have a lot more people. I have 4 engineers on my car. And then I have 10 mechanics on my car.
Super Formula.
And Super Formula. And then you have the executives who look over everything. And so it's like a lot closer. And the setup work we're doing is so relatable. Like I go from racing in Japan, I do a race, I come back to the UK, I go to simulator. This is before I was driving an F1, but I go back to simulator and we're working on some stuff for the Red Bull. And it's very relatable what, the stuff that we're working on, especially on the aero side. It's like the main focus, obviously.
Okay. So that's pretty wild. And that's something I didn't appreciate, because I was aware of the 2 engine manufacturers. It's a spec chassis. This season you had new aero that you were working through a lot of that with, but I didn't appreciate how intense that was from an engineering and development point of view. So yep. If you had to, the shortest answer, Super Formula, the shortest answer, it's like a miniature Formula 1 car. Is that
I would say it's, well, it is, but it's not actually, because
okay?
the speed is close to Formula One. So, but if I was to explain what it's actually like to drive the car, it's like the old spec F3 car, the Verstappen F3 car that he raced and went into Formula One. That Formula 3 car on just like steroids, that car, the feeling,
Gotcha.
because Super Formula is very light. I know you said short answer, and I'm giving you long answers, but
Yeah.
the car is very, very light, and it's very sort of underpowered for like the downforce level that it has. So, but the feeling of driving it, it's super agile. There's a lot going on, a lot of corrections. Whereas Formula One, you just have like massive downforce, massive power, massive tires, massive brakes, just massive everything. But to be honest, the Super Formula is, if you look at Suzuka, you take away the straights, they're very close
Okay.
in terms of speed.
That's yeah. I was looking at some of the lap times, but just another thing on like the introduction to Super Formula. Did you have any issues with the language barrier working with your team or engineers, being that it's an entirely Japanese series? Was that a challenge for you?
Yeah, for sure it was a challenge, and I think I'm very lucky that the team I went to was massively embraced having me come in and really worked on that side of it for me, because they could have absolutely gone, well, it's your job to learn as much Japanese as you can to make this work, because everybody there does speak Japanese. But my team they paired me up with an engineer who speaks at the start of the season very basic English, but the guy went and did like 5 days a week English lessons. He found like a New Zealand teacher and everything, just to get the accent and the
Right.
slang and everything. And like basically the commitment level there is like I've never seen. It's like that's one of the other things that's very, very comparable is these guys. I remember at the start of the season doing like pre-event stuff for the first round, and I'd be on like a Zoom call like this to the team. And in Japan, it's like honestly like 12:30 in the middle of the night, like it's midnight, and the Zoom call is happening. I can see the car in the background. The number one guy is working on the car in the background. The mechanic's working on it. The engineers are in the workshop. Like these guys sleep in the garage. They work so hard.
That must have been a good feeling knowing that you were working with a team like that and everybody's literally nose down, just flat out. That's awesome.
The best feeling. Yeah.
So I want to dig into a little bit into the performance aspect of the Super Formula car, talking about it relative to the F2 and the F1. So the performance of the Super Formula, in as few as words possible, kind of just to re-summarize what you said, it's let's talk about it. Tire grip, aero grip, balance and stability, and then the power. Like, how do you F2 to Super Formula? How do you compare those two?
F2 to Super Formula.
Yeah.
Power is very similar. Power is very, very similar. I mean, quite a different delivery. The Super Formula is a 2-liter 4-cylinder, right?
Yep.
So it's quite a small engine.
Yeah.
But delivers very similar power.
So are we talking about turbo lag on the 2-cylinder or turbo lag on or anything like that, like drivability?
There's less turbo lag in Super Formula than Formula 2. There's a lot more lag in Formula 2. But these, like I said, I mean, you have Honda and Toyota who are every year, these guys are pushing the limits with these engines to extract everything out of them. So tire grip, very, very different. Yokohama versus a Pirelli.
Yep.
The Yokohama it's very unique, has a very stiff sidewall. So I guess the peak, once you go over the peak limit of grip, once you reach like the maximum grip that you're going to get out of a corner, as soon as you step over it, you have a big drop in grip. Like there's a very, very big drop. So
that rewards precision as well and anticipating how much you can throw the car into the corner.
Exactly. You can't basically, it's very hard to slide the tire. It's very hard to get a slide out of it because once you step over it, you lose grip. That was one of the biggest things that was challenging to learn. Then you have downforce level, a lot more downforce in Super Formula, and a lot more sensitive. So we're working like ride heights wise. You have to be so accurate, low speed versus high speed, to be reaching your targets, compared to Formula 2, where we never really looked at like aero efficiency and trying to be at perfect level of ride heights and stuff like that. We would use ride heights for rake and things like that, but we wouldn't use it for like getting maximum efficiency out of the aero.
Okay, that's super interesting, and it's just like, yeah, I'm already starting to draw the conclusions and pictures in my head in terms of like the detail level of preparation, the precision that you need to operate at, and it's still mind blowing to me.
We would roll around, like we'd go out for the format in Japan is sick. The way that they lay out the races, you'd have like an 8-minute warm up before your race. You go out, you like 3 laps, and then roll up to the grid basically. And in that warm up, you kind of get a little bit of a feeling of where the car's at, and we'd also check ride heights. And honestly, every time we'd roll up on the grid before the race, we'd be like, okay, we're going to slightly adjust the ride height. It's not at target, and we're talking 0.5 millimeter. We're going to change the ride height, which is like almost to me, I'm like, that's so unnecessary, but let's do it.
I love it. Precision. I mean, it's the kind of things that you strive for. It's like, we need to be so precise on this stuff because it does make a difference. So
it does. Let's
talk about the main difference in terms of those characteristics between, now, spoiler alert, you drove the Alpha Tauri for 4 or 5 races this season. We'll come back to that. But like, what was the main difference between the F1 and the Super Formula car?
The power is very different. Formula One is obviously a lot of power, and that, like, the downforce level in high speed, like when you reach sort of the corners where you're doing like 300 kilometers an hour or close to, that downforce level is just like nothing else, and that's really, really different to everything I've ever driven, not just Super Formula, but that's where, like, Super Formula's, from my neck point of view, it was always been quite hard on my neck, but then you get an F1 and it's just like a whole nother level. So, and then the braking as well, because of that ridiculous amount of downforce that it produces. When you brake in Formula One, we're doing a lot higher, terminal speed compared to Super Formula, and we're braking. I can compare to Suzuka, for example, because I drove both tracks in both cars, and you're braking at the same points in Formula One, and the car just stops on a dime. So it's very different, but then Formula One is very heavy.
Yeah.
So, and you feel that you're shifting a lot of weight all the time. So,
yeah. What about, like, for example, like, so you talked about the Pirellis on the F2 had they were a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more roll on the sidewall and everything else. The Super Formula tire was quite stiff and was sharp peak. How did you feel that characteristic on the F1 car?
Formula One was more of a different sensitivity to that, because the tire itself was probably more forgiving, but because of the amount of downforce you're producing when you're going through really, really high speed sections, if you have like a snap or a moment, you, rather than having a forgiving tire, it almost doesn't matter, because you lose so much downforce starting the car in high speed that it's just like you have these unbelievable snaps.
So you're so far out of shape and it scares you properly.
So I think the tire itself is probably more similar to F2, obviously in F1, with both being Pirellis. But yeah, I would say it's more the downforce that's less forgiving in Formula One because of just how much it's producing.
Yeah. The next question, F2 and Formula One, the overtake mechanism is DRS. But in Super Formula, you got to play around with an engine power boost push to pass. What was your take on that in terms of the impact on racing?
I thought it was really cool, because I thought it was cool, but I also like the concept of DRS. I think there's pros and cons to it. The thing in Super Formula that was always interesting is you can use the system whenever you want, but you have 200 seconds for the whole race. I think it changed race to race, but on average it was 200 seconds. And basically you can use this whenever you want, this 200 seconds. You could use it up in one go if you like, but as soon as you use it, once you press the button, the timer goes down, and as soon as you turn it off, you have to then wait like a lap and a half. Normally it's close to 2 laps before you can use it again. Okay. So it starts to create a place like Fuji, for example, where it has a big long straight. You get this offset. A guy would use it, say I'm racing a guy, I'd use it, I'd overtake him, he wouldn't use it, but then I'd turn it off for turn 1, obviously, to save it for the rest of the lap. I wouldn't have it the next lap, and he would, so then he'd use it on me again, and you just get this this offset, which makes it really, really tricky. So then you get into situations where you have to use your mirrors and basically estimate the closing speed of the car behind and try and work out if he's using overtake or if it's slipstream that he's got this run. Because if he's not using overtake and he's using slipstream, you then want to block it with overtake. But if he's not used it, then he's going to get it the next lap. So you just get this honestly, the amount of times you're like trying to work out the closing speed of a car behind you to work out whether he was using the system or not was like really, really tricky. But the cool thing is if you overtake somebody with it, you leave it on, you use it out of the corner, for example, and use it to block. So it's a lot more variable, whereas DRS is obviously the same thing.
Yeah. So if you had to pick one, let's say you went back and you drove the Alpha Tauri tomorrow, and you got to pick one mechanism that you would like from A, from a racing point, and B, what you think makes more interesting racing. Are you picking one definitely, or are you still not sold either way?
I'm not sold. I think there's pros and cons to both.
Okay.
I think the problem is you can get in situations where you can just use overtake to block. If you do it correctly, you can just use it to block every time. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think I couldn't pick.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Let's change gears. I want to talk about the experience, the racing and the competition, new country, new circuits, new teams. We've talked a bit about your team. We've talked a little bit about some of the other competitors. So let's see if I've got this right. We've got 9 rounds over 7 meetings on 5 different circuits. You've got Fuji, Suzuka, Autopolis, Sugo, and Motegi. How many of those circuits did you know before you got to Super Formula?
Before I got there at all, 0. So I'd never driven on any of them. But then we did postseason, preseason in Suzuka.
Okay.
But the rest of them, each round was the first time being there until we did the double ups. But yeah, it was most of them were first time. And that was obviously one of the challenges about the season.
Which was super impressive to me, watching how well you did at all of those places, having never turned a wheel on those circuits before you got into that Super Formula car. What was your favorite of the 5 circuits?
We had massive success in Fuji, so it's got to be there. But I also really liked Autopolis. Was a fun circuit. That place was enjoyable to drive.
Yeah. Was there anything particularly special or different about the Japanese circuits, let's say, to circuits back home in New Zealand or circuits on the European, F3, F2 feeder calendar? Was there anything like that stood out in terms of, I don't know, like emotionally, spiritually, or characteristic wise or flow about these circuits that you found interesting, charming, rewarding, challenging?
I think, yeah, for sure. They were very unique, but there was, I would say, 2 sets or 2 kinds. You had Suzuka Fuji that were quite comparable to an F1 circuit spec. Not to they're sort of more similar to an older style circuit for sure. But then you go to places, Sugo, I couldn't believe that we were racing these like almost Formula One level cars on this like New Zealand spec track. Is what it felt like.
I watched the onboard from the pole lap from that place, and it's like, it almost looks like a club racing circuit. Yeah, but it was raw though. It was super raw.
It's like you finish a lap there and your heart rate is just through the roof, but it's dangerous for sure, and like the runoff to the point where like we were watching an F3 race on the weekend we were racing, and this poor dude is all he's done is run wide off on the curb. He's driven in the grass, and on a normal circuit you'd bounce through the grass and just come back on the track, but he's just hit a hole in the ground. It's ripped the whole front of the car, the suspension, everything just rips out of it. From all he's done is drop a wheel and run a little bit wide. So like those kind of things you obviously don't experience on Formula One spec tracks, but it definitely brings a more exciting part, and that's why I love driving on some of the New Zealand tracks at home as well.
Yeah, that's super cool, because like I feel like some of the old school Formula One tracks have that feel and vibe about them, and some of the more modern tracks seem a little bit sterilized. But looking at some of the onboards from those Japanese circuits, and I was watching a video of you driving, I forget which circuit it was in New Zealand. It was a video that just came out today with the
Islands.
Yeah, that looked that looked special. That looked actually special.
It's my favorite track in the world.
Yeah, I think I might have to go out there and engineer that TRS Winter Series, man. But I'm excited, and that country is beautiful. Honestly, man, I'm super envious. But let's talk about the competition in Super Formula. What was it like going up against some of these Japanese drivers that have been driving Super Formula for years? They knew the cars very well. I mean, this season you had an introduction of some new aero packages, I think was the upgrade. But these guys know these tracks. They've been, they've done their feeder series effectively on these circuits, and you show up to their home turf. And what was it like? Was there, we've got car knowledge, we've got tire knowledge, we've got aero knowledge, and then we've got circuit knowledge. So talk me through that. What was it like going up against these guys that were they're experts in that, and they're they're no slouches either.
They just, honestly, it was like driving against robots in the way that they just wouldn't, especially in the qualifying, they just wouldn't miss. They've done, some of them have done more than 10 seasons and on 5 circuits, which is the biggest thing. It's not even like doing 10 seasons of Formula One. You're doing just the same 5 circuits every single year.
Yeah.
And we would have one practice session. So when we'd rock up to these new events, we'd have one practice session to try and like get on the level. That's why I think qualifying was always a challenge, and we'd never quite be, I think by the race, we were always in a good situation and competitive, but sometimes qualifying was like, honestly, it would be the last lap of qualifying. I'd put a lap together and just kind of fake it till you make it kind of thing and pull one out. But up until that point, sometimes I would have been, a good half a second off.
Yeah, because I was looking, that brings me on to my next question is the numbers don't tell the whole story, because you had a phenomenal season in Super Formula, just finishing a handful of points off, and there was a couple quite unlucky things that coulda, shoulda, woulda, but you were super impressive. You only have 1 pole this season, but you had 3 race wins. And is that down to the local knowledge, the preparation, the precision of the local drivers?
That's it. Yeah, it's just qualifying. They were just so strong. Like it's obviously, imagine you're doing the same 5 tracks every year for 10 or more seasons. You just go out and it's in there. You know how to do it. So that was always the trickiest part. And obviously our pole came at the very last race of the season, which I think makes a little bit of sense considering the way the season, well, the nature of the going into each weekend.
Yeah. What was the biggest challenge for you in Super Formula?
That would be, I would say that would have been it.
Yeah.
The trying to adapt. It would be, we'd have a good weekend in, say, Fuji, and then we'd go to the next round. It would be like, okay, back to square one, new track. Basically do it all again. And then you'd complete that weekend, and the next one, another new track, do it all again kind of thing. And it was like starting from square one. It was hard to get momentum on previous races because each one was so different.
Yeah. Do you feel like that, that was a skill that challenged you as a driver and forced you to adapt? Like, do you feel like that was something you walk away from that feeling stronger as a person, as a driver?
Yeah. It's a new set of skills. I definitely, gained from doing this unique way of racing. Obviously, you're going for a second season and it's a different story, but I think it's definitely something that as a driver, I would definitely have benefited from.
Yeah. So, I mean, we go back to the beginning of the question. It's like, why did you go to Super Formula? It's like, well, they're like, Liam, we're sending you to Japan for a year so you can race this. But when you come off the back of that, you're probably thinking, I'm so much a better driver now as a result of that.
If you look at the exact situation I was thrown in this year, I know we'll talk about it, but getting thrown into Formula One, I am so glad that I did at least half the season or 80% of the season of Super Formula before jumping in a Formula One car, because I think without it, I just don't think I definitely wouldn't have been as strong, or I would have struggled more because of that. I learned so much just doing those first few races in Super Formula.
So let's frame the story a little bit. It's Zandvoort after the summer break.
Yeah.
You're in the Red Bull garage during free practice sessions because you're Red Bull junior driver and your job is reserve driver when you're at the circuit. That's why you're there.
Yeah.
So you see Daniel avoiding the crash and going into the wall, and you see that steering wheel knock. Are you looking at GP and maybe Cookie? Like, are they looking at you?
I didn't look at, to be honest, I didn't even see the steering wheel snap in the crash. It was only because it was red flags. So it was like 10 minutes later, they showed a replay and they pulled up, how they have the replay, they have the radio come up and then they'll have the description of the radio. Because obviously in the garage, you're going to hit it on. I can't hear the commentators and
Sure.
What the F1 session is, So, but they show the text of what the driver says. And it was Daniel saying basically like, oh shit, my hand, or something like that. It was related to basically his hand. So
did your stomach drop?
It was honestly, it was like a half a second of possibility, but then I just carried on watching the session, and I honestly didn't think anything of it. It was so quick, and it was only like 10 minutes later, or 20 minutes later, probably. It was well into the session that I got a message from Marco from Alpha Tauri, and he said, as soon as the session's done, you need to come straight to the hospitality. like it's absolutely urgent. And then I knew straight away what it was about. And I was just like pacing around the back of the Red Bull garage. And like, honestly, I remember like Cookie was like looking across at me like, what the hell are you doing? Because it was still like 10 or 20 minutes left of the session.
Yeah, he definitely didn't mention that to me. That's not why I asked at all.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So let's get into it. It's free practice 3. It's weather's terrible, isn't it? Wasn't free. It was free practice 3 was wet,
Raining.
And you are thrown into the Alpha Tauri to replace the injured Daniel. What was the biggest surprise? What was the biggest shock to you?
Well, I'd never driven on the Inter, so and it was a tire that I knew. The Inter's like it's a tire that works because of the way Formula One is at the moment. If it's wet enough that you use a full wet tire, it's basically too wet to drive because there's so much standing water. So the Inter works better anyway. Like if it's drivable, it's going to be on the Inter.
Yeah.
So I knew we'd be on it, but it's a tire that you have to go out and just keep the temp straight away. If you don't drive fast enough, you lose temp, and then it's like a slick. So I like drove out there, and I was just like, I drove out on a wet for like 2 laps, but then we put the Inter on. It was like, man, I just got to try and almost fake it. But
you knew that you had to keep the energy in the Inter to keep it alive, right? So you're in your head, you're like, don't slow down, or what was that like?
Always just drive faster.
Yeah.
But I had no feeling. It was the most horrible feeling of I had no, being that green in the car, I just had no feeling of what was happening beneath me. There's like such a disconnect feeling of me to the tire to the track. You know, normally when you're comfortable in a car and you see, and I will never forget it, I came around that penultimate corner in Zandvoort, and Max came by me, and I saw him just the rear like mid corner slide, and he just slid the thing all the way out to the exit curb, across the curb, and around the last corner. And I remember seeing that and just be like, dude, I can't do that. Like right now, there's no way. I just have no feeling of being able to slide the car. And it was just like, oh, it was so horrible. And to try and learn it as quickly as possible, to try and get that confidence level, that just takes time. And I just didn't have it.
Yeah, you don't get time. This is do or die, isn't it? Was that humbling seeing Max just manhandling that car in those treacherous conditions like that? You're like, that's the level right now, man.
It is. It's something that I know. I know that because I have enough experience in different cars to know that within time, I get that feeling. Because every time you jump in a new car, it's like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And I know that after a certain amount of time, you're able to do that kind of thing. So I knew that it would come in time, but it definitely wasn't a nice feeling. And just knowing that, the biggest thing about the whole experience was I didn't know how long I was going to have. At that point, Zandvoort was the only weekend I knew I was driving. So you know that you have such a short amount of time to try and prove something. But when I'm in that position, free practice 3, first time in the car, you know, way off the pace, that was hard.
Yeah, but I guess at the same time, I think that speaks to your maturity as well, considering you got in the car, you got through that free practice 3 session on the Inters, you qualified 20th, but through all of that, you kept your nose clean the entire time, and you moved forward during the race. And I thought it was super mature for me, because you knew you had something to prove, but at the same time, you knew your limit quite well, it seemed.
It was just don't crash. That was the biggest thing. Was like, just don't shunt the car. And in that free practice session, I spun once, and I spun coming onto that last corner where I saw Max do that big, drift out. I spun it there, and because of the way the circuit's banked, I spun at the top of the banking, and everything was locked, and I was just sliding down towards the wall. And honestly, I reckon I would have pushed like 250 bar on the brake, just like so hard, because I could see the wall coming, and I was just, please don't do a front wing, like just, and I just touched it, and the wing was fine. So the race was just basically about don't shunt, and we got the race. The start of it was crazy, wet conditions, and then it dried out, and that was where I started to get comfortable with the car. I did like 30 laps in completely dry conditions. The tire was degrading. I was starting to have a good feeling of basically that feeling and what was happening there. Had a bit of racing with another car as well, and then I started to get comfortable.
That's so we're talking, you got a couple wet sessions, a qualifying session, which was probably terrifying, honestly. And then you get on the dries, and you get those laps under your belt. And and at that point, like you said, you didn't know what your next event was going to be. Was it going to be the final round in Super Formula, or were you going to be back in the Alpha Tauri again? So
next week,
yeah. So let's talk about that. Like, what was here's the thing that we talk about a lot is the car complexity. You've got Formula 2, Super Formula, and you've got the Formula 1. You've got, I mean, I used to spend a lot of time talking through the drivers, through the steering wheel and all the systems. Was that a little bit of overload, or did you find it not too much?
That's the bit.
Starts procedures, when to use the battery, how to use the battery, all the default codes and all that. Talk me through that. How was that experience like?
You obviously understand it completely, and that is honestly that's like the trickiest part about jumping into Formula One is actually just operating the car and being able to basically deliver all of the switch changes that you get called, because especially in a race you get called so many times. Sometimes it's once a lap that you have to do these defaults, and I that was one of the hardest things, was especially in Zandvoort, the way the track was. Trying to do these switch changes during that track was really, really tricky. So that's definitely one of the things but it becomes, once you understand it, it's something that is so cool as a driver, because you have not just the defaults that you get told by your engineer that you probably don't feel so much in the car, it's more stuff for them, but then you have your performance settings, you have diff, engine braking, brake shape, you have all these things that you can change on the go with toggles as well. That's the stuff that as a driver, it's really exciting to use.
Yeah, and those are the go faster bits, because if you've got a problem with the brake shape or something, you can change it. You can do 3 things at once you learn those systems. Did you get comfortable with those at the end of your stint in the Alpha Tauri?
For sure, and I remember using that race in Zandvoort to just change, like, even if it wasn't going to do anything to make me faster, it was just to get a feeling of it. I just did diff changes sometimes, did a bit of engine braking just to see what it did, stuff like that, just to have a sort of feeling of what it did, because that's the stuff that I knew that if I was to keep driving, that's the stuff that's really important, because if there is, like you say, one specific corner that you're struggling, that's really important.
Yeah, no, and that's where you find those advantages, those little tiny gains. It's like, I can't brake as hard or as late as I'd like, or I'm locking rears and dragging them through a whole race stint. That's a good way to run into pain and degradation.
Yeah, exactly.
So would you say that the systems took up quite a bit of capacity to get used to?
It's what we spent the whole, from finding out I was driving to driving the car in free practice 3, it's what we basically spent the whole time learning. And luckily I had done so much simulator and driven the car in the past with Red Bull, and obviously in the free practice sessions, that honestly, without that, there's just no way.
Yeah. So you said, let's go back, rewind a little bit to Super Formula. Like, I want to talk a load about your time in Formula One, but I'm conscious of your time, and this video is obviously going to be about Super Formula. So I'll get to some final questions, but you said Super Formula was a huge asset to help you prepare for Formula One. The chaos, the uncertainty, the learning on your feet. Was there anything that stood out to you about the performance level of the Formula One car that nothing could have prepared you for? Can you speak to that?
I think it's more even the performance level on the body, honestly. The race, I know I did some pretty tough races in the scheme of things, with Singapore, Qatar, places like that. I think it's the length of the races, the size of the car that you're driving, and basically the physical side that, that's the stuff that was really probably the most tricky. I think you start the season in tracks that aren't quite that level. So going into some pretty, tough, like Zandvoort is my neck was falling off, honestly, halfway through the race.
Did you ask for the pad at the next race?
Luckily, Daniel had them in already, thankfully. So I honestly owed him for having those in, because I just left what he had.
Yeah.
And obviously I was definitely using them. I think that's honestly what you can't really prepare for with F1 is the length of the race, the mental overload. Like when you're getting all these default calls all the time and you're struggling to physically drive the car, that's really what's tough about F1.
I take a lot of this stuff for granted, and I don't have these conversations with the drivers when I was there, because you're just kind of like in the zone. But it's really humbling hearing these stories and talking about how daunting and how challenging it actually is, because we're sitting here, me in my nice comfy chair doing my commentary of the race, and I'm like, yeah, just go a bit faster, mate. But honestly, dude, so the physicality of it was the biggest thing.
And then there's the rest, there's the mental side, there's the pressure of knowing, in my situation at least, I knew I had such limited races And because it's F1, this is now, I know everything I've done in the past matters, but it matters a lot less now. This is what I'll be judged on.
Yeah.
How I drive these races, this is what will define whether I become a Formula One driver in the future or not. So I knew that level of pressure I'd never dealt with before. And you have the media in Formula One, as you know, you have like the attention. It's so crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, let's talk about your F1 results. Netherlands, 20th qualifying, raced up to P13. Italy from 12th to 11th. Singapore from 10th to 9th. Japan, 11th to 11th. And Qatar, 18th to 14th. You did nothing but go forwards from where you qualified. And to be fair, to put that in context, when we talk about getting into the top 5 teams right now, I don't think that car was on that level. So I'm looking at these results and these numbers. I think you got everything out of it from the outside. How would you rate your Formula One performance out of 10?
You always, okay, as a simple number like that, there's always more. So you can never rate a 10.
You can't, yeah. If you do, you're full of shit, honestly.
Yeah, you're full of shit, 100%. Exactly. So I'm thinking like, considering all the situations, an 8, I would say, it was the most important thing I ever had to do. So it basically was, it takes over your life for that period. And I put absolutely everything into it. So I would say, like an 8, I would be happy with. I would say that's probably fair, but I think there's always more. There's always, you finish a race and you're like, we've done this.
Yeah. I left a little bit on the table there. Pit stop positioning, stuff like that. Race starts sometimes.
That kind of stuff. That stuff was all obviously stuff that I was like, nearly frying a clutch in pit stops and stuff like that.
Yeah. What about your Super Formula season? How would you rate your Super Formula season out of 10? Because that's what this video is about, is your Super Formula season. I know everybody's like, oh, let's talk about Formula One. I'm going to harass you about the Super Formula because I'm sure you're bored, maybe not bored to death of talking about F1, but I think Super Formula is a super interesting thing, and your insight into that world to me has been super valuable because it's a little bit like on the fringes for the Western audience in terms of the approachability of it and the exposure to it. So let's ask the question. How would you rate your Super Formula season out of 10?
I'd probably say an 8 as well.
Where did you lose 2 points?
MotoGP. We lost the championship in MotoGP. The crash on the start didn't need to happen. It was something that I obviously you'll always look back at and kick yourself for. And you know what? It was something that I knew in the moment. It's something that I hadn't even had the crash yet. I was facing backwards, looking at the whole field coming towards me, and I was thinking in that moment, why this is so costly. This is probably going to now define everything. So that's where I deduct those points.
Yeah. Okay. I think, are you marking yourself down for the qualifying performances as in not knowing the circuits as well as everybody else? Or did you achieve your expectations in those moments?
I think considering the nature of it, I would say that obviously on paper, I got out-qualified by my teammate more than not. But because it was, a lot of those tracks were first times, I would say, honestly, that was not where I'd mark it down.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. You know what? You're very brutally honest about that. And I think that's a really important characteristic for you guys to be honest, but not kick yourself about stuff. So that's really cool to see that perspective. What was the most valuable lesson that you learned from racing in Super Formula?
These are questions that are hard to pick, one thing down to, it's hard to really define it to one, honestly. There's so many things you learn throughout the season. Yeah, I couldn't put it down to one.
Could I try to push you in a direction then? What about the adaptability thing? The idea of new circuit, new place, new environment, and being able to thrive in that situation and that strengthening your approach as a driver and your understanding of.
I think it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter what situation it is. There's so many situations where you are thrown in something that you have to adapt to. So for me, it was Super Formula. It was a lot of the new tracks and stuff like that. But adapting is, no matter what it is, it's the same thing that you're doing. So I think that was something that I learned a lot from, and definitely would have helped going into a situation like Formula One. Obviously, having to adapt very quickly to that. I think doing Super Formula definitely helped with that.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. So I've got a couple final questions for you, and say as much or as little as you'd like. What are your plans next season? What do you got right now?
Next year, I'm as reserve, basically. So it's basically similar to what I was doing this year, but I won't be racing in a full-time championship. So basically, it's carrying on preparing for Formula One. A lot of work with the team behind the scenes, but obviously in this situation, there's no place for a seat next year, so it's basically full-time reserve. Yeah,
but I think, I mean, looking on the outside, and I think you proved what you can do, and you've shown that through F2 Super Formula and your 5-race stint in F1 that you've got what it takes. And now I guess it's just the waiting game, isn't it?
We will see. That's it. Exactly that. It's just waiting and seeing.
So, if you could go back and do Super Formula again, would you do it? If you could do another season, if the means were there to do another season, would you do it, or do you you've learned what you needed to learn from that, and you need to focus on the next step?
I think that's it. I think because there are still differences to Formula One, and it's very different to drive the cars. Or I think I got everything out of it, or I got the most out of it that I need to take with me forwards into basically whatever I do next, which is obviously hopefully Formula One. So that I think now it's more in terms of the racing stuff. I've done everything leading up to it. Obviously, even now a little bit of F1, and I think it's now just preparing for Formula One.
Cool. Now, dude, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your honesty on all this stuff. And I think it's really cool to shed a little bit of light on that story that a lot of people don't really know about the Formula One Championship. I could talk your ear off for another hour, but I know you've got stuff to do. You're probably off to the airport tomorrow to go out to Vegas.
No, dude, I'm driving. Finally, no more. No. I mean, I've done a ridiculous amount of flights recently, so I'm going to drive to Vegas from here. It's only a couple of hours, which will be a lot better. So yeah, nice. No worries at all. Thanks for making that easy.
Yeah. Are you driving anything nice or something pretty chilled?
So I'm coming back here in December, and I'm sorting out getting like because I'm in America, like a Raptor from Ford or something like that.
Yes.
That's the plan.
I love it, man. I love it. So where can everybody find you? Are you going to be doing anything new on YouTube or Instagram? Anything that people can look out for?
Normal, yeah, definitely YouTube. Starting YouTube in the next couple of weeks, and that'll be, I think, there'll be loads of content coming out on that over the break. I think when sort of the racing stuff dies down. But that's still to be kind of worked out, to be honest.
Cool. I think everybody will figure out where to find you on YouTube. Then I don't think that'll be too hard, mate.
Hopefully.
Well, awesome, mate. Dude, I appreciate your time. Have fun in Vegas and stay out of the casinos, all right?
Yeah, I will. No worries. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that episode, and don't forget to check out Liam Lawson on his socials and keep an eye out for his YouTube, and hopefully I'll be back with some more conversations over the winter. Be sure to drop a subscription over to BRRRAKE F1 over on YouTube, and if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget that I also publish these to all your favorite audio podcast platforms, so you can listen to them in the car, at the gym, or whatever else, but I'll see you guys soon.